December 16, 1944. Early morning, Monschau, Germany. The frozen earth trembled, but something was terrifyingly, incomprehensibly different this morning. American artillery shells weren't striking the ground. They were detonating in mid-air, precisely above advancing German positions. This created a lethal rain of steel fragments that no foxhole could protect against. Among the 326th Volksgrenadier Division, soldiers who had survived years on the Eastern Front encountered something that defied their understanding of warfare. This was death delivered from above with mathematical precision. At that moment, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group had made one of the most consequential unauthorized decisions of the Battle of the Bulge. Against standing orders and without permission, he had ordered his gunners to load shells equipped with the most closely guarded secret in the Allied arsenal: proximity fuses. These devices, containing miniature radar systems, would detect their distance from targets and detonate at the optimal height, multiplying artillery lethality by a factor of 50. The mathematics of death were about to be rewritten in the frozen forests of the Ardennes. The storm unleashed. Operation Watch on the Rhine had begun with tremendous promise for the Wehrmacht. Hitler's last gamble involved 200,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces, all masked in secret through the fog-shrouded Ardennes. The initial bombardment at 0530 hours on December 16th had achieved complete tactical surprise. American intelligence had failed catastrophically, and many frontline units were either green replacements or exhausted veterans sent to this quiet sector for rest. At Monschau, Colonel Axelson faced an impossible tactical situation. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small reconnaissance unit, was being overwhelmed. Conventional artillery couldn't stop the assault. In desperation, Axelson made his historic decision to deploy the secret proximity-fused shells. He would later face potential court-martial, but in that moment, he recognized that following orders meant certain defeat. Science of death. The proximity fuse represented the convergence of American scientific innovation and industrial capacity at their absolute peak. Unlike conventional shells that required direct impact, or time fuses that often detonated at wrong heights, the proximity fuse contained a self-contained radar system no larger than a coffee can. Inside each fuse, American engineers had packed 130 electronic components, including miniature vacuum tubes that could withstand the incredible 20,000 times gravity force of being fired from an artillery piece. The physics involved were staggering. At the moment of firing, the acceleration would crush a glass ampule, creating a battery that powered the tiny radar for the shell's flight duration. Dr. Merle Tuve at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory had driven this development with Manhattan Project-level intensity. The laboratory, disguised as an abandoned used car dealership, employed 3% of all American physicists at peak production. Security matched that of the atomic bomb program. The technical challenge had seemed insurmountable. Vacuum tubes designed for radios had to be completely redesigned to survive being fired from cannons. They had to function while spinning at extreme rotational speeds, work in all weather conditions, and be sensitive enough to detect targets without premature detonation. The breakthrough came through miniaturization techniques that would later revolutionize the electronics industry. Dr. James Van Allen's tubes were no larger than pencil erasers. By December 1944, American factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses daily. Over 100 companies contributed to the effort, from RCA and General Electric to Sylvania and Crosley Corporation. The program's cost reached $1 billion in 1940s dollars, second only to the Manhattan Project in wartime spending. Authorization crisis and expansion. Axelson's unauthorized use on December 16th created an immediate command crisis. He had violated direct orders restricting proximity fuses to anti-aircraft use, fearing that captured examples might be reverse-engineered by the Germans. But the devastating effectiveness at Monschau was undeniable. The German attack had been stopped cold with casualties that shocked both sides. Word of the weapon's impact reached Supreme Headquarters rapidly. General Eisenhower, recognizing the desperate situation developing across the Ardennes, formally requested authorization on December 19th. By December 21st, all restrictions were lifted, and proximity fuses were released for general ground combat use across the entire Bulge battlefield. The rapid distribution that followed demonstrated American logistical superiority. Within days, proximity-fused shells were being delivered to artillery units throughout the Ardennes. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion at Bastogne received their allocation just as the German ring closed around the town. The 420th Armoured Field Artillery Battalion, with their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, began using them to defend the northwest approaches. The 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, employed them with devastating effect southwest of Bastogne. Each unit discovered the same truth. Proximity fuses transformed artillery from a support weapon into shells. Between December 19th and 31st, the 463rd fired exactly 7,676 rounds. While not all were proximity fused due to limited supply, those that were had devastating psychological and physical effects. German assault formations simply melted away under the airburst barrages, with entire platoons eliminated in seconds. The December 22nd attack, following General McAuliffe's famous "nuts" reply to the German surrender demand, showcased the weapon's effectiveness. German infantry advancing across snow-covered fields in traditional formations were caught in the open. The proximity-fused shells detonated overhead with precise timing, creating overlapping patterns of destruction that left no safe zones. Demonstration of proximity-fused lethality occurred at the Suir River near Ettelbruck on December 25th to 26th. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was driving north to relieve Bastogne, personally witnessed this engagement and recorded it in his memoir, War as I Knew It. A German battalion attempting to cross the partially frozen river believed they were hidden by darkness and fog from American observers. Traditional artillery would have required careful adjustment of fire, giving the Germans time to complete their crossing or seek cover. But proximity-fused shells needed no such adjustment. Patton wrote, "We caught a German battalion crossing the Suir. The new posit ammunition was devastating. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run. The river behind them, our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies. This figure, 702 killed by actual count, represents one of the few precisely documented casualty figures from proximity fuse employment. The mathematical efficiency was stark. A single battalion essentially ceased to exist in minutes with no possibility of escape or defense. The psychological impact spread throughout German units in the sector, with soldiers seemed like science fiction to 1940s soldiers. Each fuse contained a tiny radio transmitter, continuously sending out waves that reflected off objects, ground, trees, vehicles, human bodies. As the shell approached its target, the reflected signal strengthened. When it reached predetermined intensity corresponding to optimal burst height, an electronic switch triggered detonation. The entire system had to function under conditions that would destroy normal electronics. During firing, the acceleration reached 20,000 times Earth's gravity, enough to crush a human body to microscopic thickness. The shells spun at rates that created. Experts examined the captured fuses and declared them impossible. The presence of vacuum tubes in an artillery shell contradicted everything German engineers believed about electronics and ballistics. They concluded the Americans were using some form of magnetic detection, or that the visible components were decoys hiding the real mechanism. This failure stemmed partly from institutional blindness. Germany had actually led proximity fuse development before the war, with working prototypes by 1940. But Hitler's order cancelling all weapons projects requiring more than 6 months to production had terminated their program. German engineers couldn't believe the Americans had solved problems they themselves had abandoned. The Christmas catastrophe. December 25, 1944, brought no holiday respite. German units attempting to use Christmas for resupply and reorganization discovered that proximity fuses recognized no ceasefires. Field kitchens, supply convoys, and assembly areas came under devastating bombardment that required no forward observers. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone fired over 1,000 rounds on Christmas Day, most proximity fused. Their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers delivered rapid, accurate fire that caught German units completely unprepared. The ability to fire effectively without observation in poor weather during darkness transformed artillery from a daylight weapon into a 24-hour threat. The psychological impact was severe. German soldiers had learned to move during poor weather when Allied aircraft couldn't fly and observers couldn't spot them. Proximity fuses eliminated this sanctuary. Death could arrive at any moment in any weather, with no warning beyond the brief whistle of incoming shells. Malmedy and Skorzeny's elite. On December 21st, SS Colonel Otto Skorzeny's elite commandos attempted to capture Malmedy. These weren't ordinary soldiers, they were specially selected troops who had rescued Mussolini, nearly captured Tito, and infiltrated American lines wearing US uniforms. They represented the best Germany could field. They met devastating proximity-fused artillery fire that transformed their American disguises from tactical advantage to death shrouds. The shells exploded overhead with uncanny precision, as if they could detect the imposters below. While exact casualty figures remain disputed, the attack failed catastrophically with heavy losses that ended Skorzeny's offensive operations. The psychological breakdown among elite SS troops proved particularly significant, as matching any wartime industrial achievement. By December 1944, over 100 American companies had converted to fuse production. The Crosley Corporation abandoned refrigerator manufacturing for fuse assembly. Emerson Radio retooled from home electronics to weapons production. Sylvania, RCA, and General Electric dedicated entire facilities to the program. Quality control exceeded anything previously attempted in mass production. Each of the 130 components underwent individual testing. Every solder joint was inspected under magnification. Random samples were actually fired to ensure survival under combat conditions. The rejection rate was ruthless. Any component showing slight deviation was discarded. The workforce, predominantly women, maintained this precision while working 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. They couldn't know what they were making due to security compartmentalization. They only knew it was vital to the war effort. By December 1944, they were producing one proximity fuse every 2 seconds around the clock. The cost reduction achieved was remarkable. In 1942, each fuse cost $732, more than a worker's annual salary. By December 1944, mass production had driven costs to $18 per unit while maintaining quality. This efficiency allowed the production of 22 million fuses during the war, with 200,000 deployed during the Battle of the Bulge alone. Patton's arithmetic. General Patton understood proximity fuses' value better than perhaps any commander. His Third Army, driving to relieve Bastogne, used them as a breakthrough weapon. His artillery commander, Brigadier General Edward Williams, developed new tactics specifically for proximity fuse employment. Williams pioneered the time-on-target concentration using proximity fuses. Multiple battalions firing simultaneously, so shells arrived together. When dozens of proximity-fused shells detonated simultaneously at optimal height, the effect was apocalyptic. German soldiers called it the bell toll of death. In the week between December 22nd and 29th, Patton's Third Army fired 50,000 proximity-fused shells. The results were decisive in breaking German resistance and opening the corridor to Bastogne. Patton himself wrote, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us." Elsenborn Ridge, the hold. The Battle of Elsenborn Ridge demonstrated proximity fuses at maximum effectiveness. Here, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions held critical terrain against the 6th SS Panzer Army, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. Over 3 days, December 17th to 19th, American artillery fired 160,000 rounds, with approximately 40,000 being proximity fused. These 25% of shells accounted for an estimated 60% of the 5,000-plus German casualties. The mathematics were undeniable. Proximity fuses multiplied American firepower by a factor of 4. The German Revolution begun in the Ardennes continues on modern battlefields where smart weapons dominate warfare. Final reckoning. The Battle of the Bulge ended January 25, 1945, with German forces in full retreat. Hitler's last offensive had cost Germany approximately 100,000 casualties while achieving nothing. American losses totaled 75,000, including 19,000 killed. The proximity fuse had proven itself not just as a weapon, but as a war winner. General Eisenhower's assessment that German possession of proximity fuses might have made D-Day exceedingly difficult, perhaps impossible, underscores their strategic importance. They weren't merely an artillery improvement, but a revolutionary technology that fundamentally changed warfare's mathematics. The German soldiers who faced proximity-fused artillery experienced something unprecedented: death delivered by shells that seemed intelligent, that could find them anywhere, that transformed the very air into a killing zone. Their experience marked warfare's transformation into the technological age. From Colonel Axelson's unauthorized first use on December 16, 1944, through the systematic deployment of 200,000 shells across the Ardennes, proximity fuses demonstrated that scientific innovation could provide decisive military advantage. The convergence of American industrial capacity, scientific genius, and tactical adaptation created a weapon that helped determine the war's outcome. The proximity fuse story is ultimately about transformation: technological, tactical, and human. It proved that industrial democracy could produce weapons of devastating effectiveness, that innovation could overcome numerical disadvantage, that the side with superior science would likely prevail. These lessons shaped not just World War II's remainder, but the entire structure of warfare that followed. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the age of technological warfare truly arrived. The mathematics of death were rewritten by tiny radar sets in artillery shells, forever changing how humans wage war. The German soldiers who died beneath proximity-fused airbursts were casualties not just of a particular battle, but of a revolution in military affairs that continues shaping our world today.